and some of the parameters around which typical values, upper and lower bounds, that kind of thing for the data. So it would be great if you already had thought about a data dictionary when you get help. And again, you might not even need help if you've thought this through. The other thing you need to do is an operational question, which is who's going to collect. Now you know sort of what the form is, what the data elements are, what kind of data you're going to collect. And then the question becomes, who's going to collect this data? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be a research assistant? Is it going to be data that the study participant actually provides by filling out a paper form or by filling out an on-screen form? Some of this is exam data that you are going to have a trained examiner examine the study subject and then either enter the data into a computer or write it on paper and then have it transcribed into the computer. Lab results, who's going to collect the blood? And then how is the blood going to get sent to the lab? And then once it's gone to the lab, how are you going to get the results back from the lab? And if it's very complicated laboratory analysis, you're going to want to get the lab results back in a file. Especially, for example, if it's microarray stuff, okay, that's going to come back to you in a file. You're not going to get that back on paper and then rekey all that into your Access database or your study database. But even if it's just a whole panel of like a metabolic panel, okay, even that, there are trade-offs between getting it in a file from whoever's running that lab for you and then just uploading the file into your database versus getting it on a piece of paper and then keying it in. And a lot of it depends on what the volume is and whether it's worth building an import process to get the file in a particular format from the person who's doing the lab and then uploading it. But you did all see how to upload data. Again, that was in Lab 2, where you got a data in an Excel spreadsheet, and then you uploaded it into an Access database. And that's possible essentially regardless of the data management tool that you're using. So a common sequence for developing your research study database is to develop a data collection forms in Word, and then create Excel spreadsheets to store the data with one column per field/attribute and one row per record or entity. And then what ends up happening is you play with that Excel database for a while and you start to realize I've pushed Excel to the edge of the envelope. And there's three ways that this commonly happens. One is going through those columns in an Excel spreadsheet and going way out to the 33rd column on subject number 1,233 becomes difficult, okay? And even if you use all the nice little scrolling things that Excel has and so forth. And at a certain point you say, I just wish I had a nice form to do this with. Well, you can develop those in Excel, but frankly, if it comes time where you want to develop a form, use Access, because Access has a nice form generation system, which you used in Lab 1. Okay, a second reason is that you find out that you've got, in your Excel workbook, you've got 5 different worksheets, individual sets of rows and columns. And because you have one worksheet that has one row per exam, and each subject has multiple exams. And you have another worksheet that has one row per subject. And then you have another worksheet which has one row per lab result. And if you find something like that, in Excel you can't really link those together based on the keys like we learned to do in Lecture 1 and in Lab 1. So then you find you need to go from Excel to Access. And then a third possibility is you're limited in Excel in terms of picking out data to examine, and you learned both in Lab 2 and Lab 3 how to use Access's query design tool, where it becomes fairly easy to filter the data, pick out a few records that you want to look at, only show yourself the fields that you're interested in, and even calculate derived fields and so forth, all within a query within Access. And so those are the three main reasons why people realize they need to move from Excel into Access or another desktop data management system. All right, then you're running along, you've got your good-looking Access database, it's working fine, and then maybe you find out that there's computer administrative problems. For example, not everybody has Access on their machine, and you don't have access. You don't have a remote desktop capability like we have here. Now, for a lot of you, that you may never reach that point. You have a remote desktop account here. You could put your Access database on that remote desktop account. The only problem is if you have other people doing data entry, they don't really have access. Well, I shouldn't use the word access. They can't get to your remote desktop account. They have to have their own remote desktop account. And then you need to talk to somebody in system administration about giving you a shared directory where you can put that Access database so all of you can get to it at the same time. Okay? And we have done that. For example, Carolyn and I, for the student database, we have a shared directory so we can both get to the student database. And so we didn't have to put the student database on the web. Okay? We both get to the student database on our remote desktop accounts, and we can both use it and share it. And by the way, Access databases, two people can be working on the same Access database at the same time. There's no problem with that. If you do ever have a problem with that, give me a call, and I'll tell you. Sometimes you have things set up wrong, but it's easy to have two people use it. Now, if Carolyn is grading the same student's assignment that I'm grading, and we're both editing that same record, then you do get write conflicts sometimes. In fact, it happened the other day with one student, and I had gone into the student and started typing my comments, and then when I tried to save the record, it said somebody else has already saved this record. So I knew that Carolyn had already gone in and graded that student's paper. But you can share Access databases. However, you may find out that sharing an Access database using a remote desktop isn't right for you, and that what you want to do is go to web-based data entry. And the beauty of web-based data entry is that all you need is an internet-connected computer and a browser. And that's all you need to rely on your network administration people for. So you don't have to go to network administration and say, look, can you set up a shared directory so both of us can, and then we both need remote desktop accounts, and then we need to both be able to get in here. All you need is a network administrator who says, okay, you have a computer and an internet connection. And if your network administrator can't handle that, you can take your own computer to Starbucks, and then you have your internet connection there, okay? And you've got your browser. So, and there is a movement, as I'm sure you all know, in the corporate world towards sort of hosting in the cloud out there and doing things. And there are two different ways that it's done, but a web-based hosted application is one where you basically have an application service provider. You get to your application through a browser, and your application, somebody else worries about the feeding and caring for the servers and so forth. But even if you're going to use something like that, QuestGen is the example we'll give today, also SurveyMonkey. We'll give two examples of that. But even if you're going to use something like that, what you've learned here about Access is useful for several reasons. One is that you're probably going to go through an Access prototype before you get to that browser-based data collection system. You might not, and it's okay if you don't. I won't be hurt. But the other thing is that when you pull your data out of that browser-based data collection system, you are going to need to format the data, query the data to generate, well, what did I say here? I said